So allow me first to very briefly introduce myself for those of you who are going to watch this video in other places. My name is Krasimir and I'm Bulgarian but live in Cyprus for about more than 13 years. And I was never interested about science, but for the last 2 years I begin to research and to develop also different technologies, different devices that they are inspired from knowledge which is from extraterrestrial civilizations. And this knowledge is not something that is common in our science, in our conventional science. And during this path, through synchronicity, I found many confirmations that prove that this knowledge is valid and that this knowledge is reliable. So I begin first this journey inspired from Bashar, which he talks about a component of a device called a space-time antenna. And this device that I'm talking about, it's like two intersected cones. Each of them is with 33.9 degree angle, and they are intersecting each other. When I start to make this device in the beginning, this what you see on the image is the fourth prototype. I didn't know nothing about space-time, why he called it antenna. I had no clue. The reason I start to make it is just to challenge my creativity and because it was fun. Okay, and this is the antenna, how it looks like. I didn't have any equipment like an oscilloscope, had absolutely no knowledge about conventional physics, electroengineering or anything else. It was just a fun home DIY project. And later on, through synchronicity, other information was presented, and I start to combine different pieces of information from different sources, many of which come through you, from the people who are from the group of Bashar. Some of them, they contact me, they give me pieces of information. Sometimes I found it by myself. And thus then, this is the second project I begin working. This is called a space-time antenna again, but it's advanced version, which is with Sierpinski gasket, Merkaba inside, 3 shells. On the right side, you can here you can see the space-time antenna while we combine the components. Everything is made out of copper, which is very conductive and allowing the perfect the field modulation to be in the right in the right place. So I will share just few words about each device and then we will start talk about the physics. This is the flash matrix device, also which came along the journey through synchronicity, device that is used from civilization of Essassani, like the engine of their spacecraft inside as a flash matrix capacitor, which not like our capacitors hold the charge, but build and release the charge thousands or millions times every second. This is how they power their spaceship, but they use different materials in order to create this, not copper. This is also a device that it's the third prototype, the third main device that we make. It's connected to anti-gravity, which it's designed to isolate the vector forces of the gravity and create a space torus around it, and thus then create a lifting force or create so-called propulsion, but with electricity, with electromagnetic field, which actually vibrate in a much higher frequency. So next thing you can see here, it's also fractal antennas that we work. They are also based on space-time field or symmetric field knowledge. We're going to talk about this in further videos, in the further transmissions. just want to share it with you so you can see, you can have some visual idea about what we are doing, and thus then we will continue to explain what are the principles behind these devices. So I will start from far away here, to share with you in the layman's term, very easy to understand, a little bit about the unified theory. So from the left side here we have a general relativity, which is dealing with gravity, with large scale objects which has a huge mass. Those are planets, stars, galaxies, and etc. So this is idea proposed from Einstein, and it's correct and it's valid. But from the other side here, we have a quantum mechanics, and quantum mechanics also is idea that is correct, is it right, but it's dealing with subatomic particles, with electromagnetic field, with strong nuclear and weak nuclear forces, and it's start approximately with Niels Bohr. And those two ideas, they are not in alignment when we're talking about a small scale like a Planck scale. They are fighting here, they cannot find agreement. So each of them separately, in a sense, is working, but when we talk about a Planck scale, they cannot find agreement. So the physics, the unified theory, cannot be unified because those two ideas cannot find agreement everywhere. They find some agreement, but when we talk about the small scale or the Planck scale, they are not in alignment there. A symmetric field physics or space-time fields are dealing with fractals and with golden ratios, and it's all about resonance. This knowledge that I find out, it's equally valid when we talk about the big and cosmic and celestial bodies like galaxies and stars and suns, but also it's valid when we talk about the quantum mechanics or the microscopic world, the subatomic particles. This is why it's in the middle, and it's combination of both. It's like combining both of this idea and can explain without any contradiction. This is why I found it so interesting. So the next thing we're going to see here, it's the four main ideas we use in order to create everything in our physics, everything that we use in our technology, or what you see in the law of the unified theory. It can be compressed in four main ideas that they are basic building blocks of anything else. The first idea is what it's called energy. So when you see energy, you can find many different definitions and explanations, and most of them are very difficult even to comprehend. But we're going to give here very short, simple, and sharp definitions in order to be very easy to understand, to be very clear. Energy, it's a radiation, and that's it. Nothing else. We don't need to know about energy. With one word we can explain what energy is. Simply, energy is radiation. The next idea, what we use in our science, it's a field. Field by itself, the most simple way to describe, it's diffused energy which occupied a specific volume in space. So this is an energy, but is diffused. When the energy is not diffused, when the energy is coherent, for example, we can have a laser beam, for example, when the energy is focused. But field, it's when the energy is diffused and occupy a specific volume in space. The third idea, it's force. Okay, and by force, we mean that this is a vector of intersecting energies. A force, it's like when we have a coherent energy, like a laser beam or signal, which is traveling or propagating or cascading through other energies which are diffused. So we have like a force of intersecting energies. This is very simple definitions about those idea, and this is everything what we need in general to create our technology. The fourth idea is vibration. Vibration simply it's nothing more but frequency or field modulation. Once we know that the energy is radiation and the field is diffuse energy, this diffuse energy have a specific frequency. It has a specific modulation. It's vibrating in a specific rate, and this is vibration. So these four ideas are the basic building blocks of our science and what we know about science and what we use to create our technology. There are two more ideas which will help us to understand and to comprehend, to combine and make finally the unified theory. The fifth idea of this, it's the template structure. The template structure of a physical reality, it's something that our scientists in CERN in Switzerland, they do their best to understand. They have the collider and they want to understand what are the smallest particles, what are the sub particles, in order to understand this template structure, how the matter is organized from the invisible world, what is the substructure behind the matter, what pathways the smallest particles like to travel in order to combine together and to be concise, to crystallize into matter. So this is the template structure. This is something that we do not yet understand, but many of our ancient civilizations, they had clue, some of them more or some of them less. Some of them, they had it by intuition. Some of them, it was taught by other extraterrestrial races. But this is something that will allow us to understand and to unify, to access the unified theory. This is what you see here down on the right. It's the tetrahedral, that this template structure has a tetrahedral structure also. The tetrahedron is the three-dimensional object of physical reality which has the smallest volume of space, and it's as you can see here, and on the left side you have the Metatron cube. You can see that it's not only a tetrahedron, but there are many different shapes. You can see hexagon, you can see a cubic structure, but this is the most efficient, this is the most basic principle of the template structure, that has a tetrahedral structure. This is very important to know, and we will see later on why this is so, why it's tetrahedral structure, and why inside a tetrahedron there are all sorts of equations that we can use in science, in biology, in chemistry, and so on and so forth. So the fifth idea, we say that it's the template structure. Once we understand what is the underlying principle of physical reality. The sixth idea, this is the consciousness. The consciousness, our scientists begin to understand that is playing a vital role in the technology. And it's very important to say that everything is made out of consciousness, and we cannot see a consciousness like an object and to investigate it, because everything is made out of consciousness. Everything is consciousness. Once we see consciousness as something separate, it's not objective, because we are consciousness also. So we need to have completely different understanding about what is consciousness, and for this it will help us once we understand this template structure, because the template structure and the consciousness, they relate to each other. They relate because everything is made out of consciousness and follows this template structure in order to organize itself. So everything is connected. So the fifth and the sixth idea, once we understand, we will finally get the clear picture, and the things will not be contradictory anymore. But here I would like to give you an example about the consciousness. Light, it's a particle or a wave. There is a double slit experiment that the scientists made, that they are shooting electrons from two slits, and they observed that the electrons behave, they make interference pattern and they behave like a wave, but sometimes they behave like a particle. You know, they understand. The most interesting thing of this experiment for me is that they understand that when you watch the experiment, when you observe the experiment, these electrons, they do not behave like waves, but they behave like particles when somebody observes them. So this means that the observer, which is consciousness, okay, which has a consciousness, it is consciousness, affect the experiment. In other words, the one who observed this experiment determine the outcome, or we can say that it's affect the matter because you're shooting electron, and if you observe it or not, the electron behave in a different way. So from your observations, you're affecting the matter, you're affecting the result. So here it's very interesting to say how, because the science is dealing with observation, it's dealing with logic, it's dealing with facts, it's dealing with the solid matter, it's dealing with things that are obvious. But if you observe something, because the science is dealing with observation, this means that the scientists, they affect the outcome. So they cannot really, it's very difficult for them to have objective viewpoint because they determine the outcome. You know, this is very important to say. From the other side, we have a metaphysics which is dealing with faith, with imagination, with intuition, with completely opposite ideas. So this is the energy states. So this is like a wave. The metaphysics is like energy state, it's more like a wave, while the left side, the science, is like a solid matter, like a particle. So at the center here, we have alchemy, which combine both this idea, and it's dealing with transformations, with transition, with harmony and resonance. In other words, the alchemy, it can understand how from energy states, from the invisible world, you can manifest solid matter, or you can manifest something that is tangible. You can crystallize something that is tangible. Alchemy is something that is in between science and metaphysics. When we learn how to combine science and metaphysics, thus then we will have access to tremendous power. Now the scientists, they claim that they work with observation and logic and the solid things, but the real truth is, if you pay attention, that the science actually is chasing all the time something that is invisible. They're all the time chasing something that is unknown. For example, like the scientists in CERN. So they are chasing the invisible, the mystic, while from the other side, the metaphysics, or the people who believe in invisible forces, on greater powers, they are dealing with something. For them, this is like a science. They have their rituals, like Bashar said, we have a 3-step formula, we have the 5 laws of creation, so they are dealing also with something like a science. So this is just to explain something before we talk about the space-time. One of the alchemical symbols here, it's a goat. What you see, it's a goat. This is the alchemical symbol of goat, which is a circle with dot at the center. From the right side here, on the top left corner, you can see the sign of sun, which is also circle with dot at the center. So now we can talk about the universe that is so our universe is made out of field energies arranged in harmonic octaves. Like, for example, we are here in this meeting, everybody of us resonate in a specific frequency, everybody of us is interested and gravitate about specific ideas, and this is something that bonds us together in the group meeting. So we create together a group of resonant frequency or resonant speeds. We create an octave. The greatest of this octave in the universe, the biggest one, it's what we call life, what we call all that is, what we call existence. It's the biggest. For example, your family, it's an octave because it's a group of resonant frequency. Your town, it's a group of resonant frequency which is bigger than your family. Your country, it's bigger group of resonant frequency, people who resonate with specific culture, with specific belief system, understanding, and religion. Then we have bigger and bigger, we have after countries, planet, then we have solar system, galaxy, and so on and so forth. This group of resonant frequency, the biggest one of them is the life, or all that is. This is the existence itself. So very important to know about this, the biggest group of resonant frequency, or the biggest octave. It's the first division. The first division, it's what you see here. It's the sphere, and it's a point at the center. Okay, this, it's looking like the symbols of alchemy, of gold and the sun. The only image that the grand alchemist was needed is to know the circle and the dot at the center. So here we have energy that it's continuously expanding from the center outward. This is the first division, and continuously to contract inward. So at the same time, we have two equal in strength forces, but opposite in direction. This is the first division. So we have at the same time force that is expanding outwards in all direction, and we have force that is contracting inwards toward the center. I can give you an example with you and me, for example. In our life, our thoughts, our feelings, our behavior is something that we emit all the time outward. We express it outward. And the circumstances, the meetings with other people, it's something that we face, that is something that come back to us. This is a very, how to say, maybe not the best or most appropriate analogy, but it's something that it can make sense. If we talk about the galaxy, if we talk about the cosmos, you can see that, for example, in our galaxy, there is a black hole at the center. This black hole, it's continuously contracting on itself, continuously absorbing energy. At the same time, our galaxy is expanding all the time outward. So we have continuously contraction at the center and also expansion outward. So this is the first division in the space-time field, when we have a sphere with the center point and we have expansion and contraction. So what is very important to know about this contraction is that the contraction is representing the potential energy in the sphere. Now we begin to talk about space-time fields, which are equal and opposite in direction. So the contraction is equal to the potential force at the center here, and this potential, or this time field, it's decelerating from a plane, from the equatorial plane, through a vector lines, and it's going inside at the center into a point. So this is how the time field is traveling from a plane to a line to a point. Also, it's very important to know that this point, it's dimensionless inside at the center, but still have address in space. It's defined by the space view around it. This is very important to know about the time field, that it's follow from a plane to a line to a point it's traveling, while from the other side we have expansion, or the kinetic energy, when we talk about the space field, and this space field is accelerating outwards. It's not decelerating, it's accelerating outwards in all directions, the space field, and have also spatial mechanical properties like forceful wind. This is very, very important to know, that those are equal in strength but opposite in direction. One is following a straight line and decelerate into a point, and the other one it's expanding outward in all directions. So we can say that this one on the left, it's the male because it's following the straight line or the edges as here, and this is the female because it's spiraling, it's expanding, it's curved. It's like a female in the sacred geometry. If you are familiar, there are female and male lines, and the female are those who are curved and the male are those who are straight.
Recording in progress.
So another another interesting thing to say is that there is no movement in one field without equal and opposite movement in the other. When we have field activity in the space field, in the contractions, we have at the same time forces that expanding. So when we affect one of those energies, the other one it's responding back because they're interconnected, they're linked. So the second division here, it's when this sphere it's divided in the middle, and you can see here that we have two pairs. This is one pair, this is two corpuscles, we call it corpuscles, or this is one pair. One of these it's space predominant and the other is time predominant corpuscles. But both of them, they have a center point in the middle, which is contracting, and the spatial sphere, which is expanding. Okay, this is very important to know. This could be a little bit confusing because we know that a space and time field, they are equal in direction and opposite, equal in strength and opposite in direction, but at the same time they are have predominances. So in a sense that the space predominant part, it's one that slightly expands, and the time predominant, it's the one that prefer tendency to contract, let's say. And they create alternating predominances. This is how they arrange, this is how they attract each other, this is how they stand together and do not mix, because they create these alternating predominances. And we're talking about here subatomic particles. We're talking about yet in this video about very, very small particles which we call corpuscles, space-time corpuscles. In the mitosis, in our biology, in the cells, we can see this idea, what we saw before. This is the first division. In the second division, you can see how the cell divides, and you can see that each cell has inside a core, or it has a time predominant center, which is contracting, and also spatial sphere. This is what we can see also in biology, and there are many different examples. The third division, we're talking about harmonic divisions here. We have 4 space-time corpuscles with 4 cores inside with time field center points. And you can see on the right side the third dimensional image, how they look like. It is important to know that each of them have time field center and space field sphere. So you will see now that depiction in our religion is the Catholic cross, for example, that it's divided in this way. This way that is divided, we call it third division. It's used also for communication, the same way like the sixth harmonic, because they do not contradict to other octave energies, and it's very easy to propagate. It's very easy to propagate through space-time, this harmonic, this specific arrangement of this harmonic. So this is depiction in our religion about the third division. And we can see in the plants that when they divide in the harmonic way, there are corpuscles. In each of them we have like a seed. Here it's orange, this is generally, we're speaking generally, those things, they can be expressed in a many different forms, in a many different shapes, but we're talking about that they divide and they have alternating predominance, and they have a center point which contracts and also a spatial sphere which expands. From the beginning, maybe not everything will be clear what I'm gonna say. Maybe 90% the things will be not clear, but with the time, when we progress, you will see that more and more things will start to make sense. They will combine and they will fit together. This is the harmonic division in technology. This is the axial flux engine, where we have S magnets. This is the north magnet. We have them in alternating predominance, creating poles, and we use this idea also in our engines. And we're going to talk about this in the further videos when we talk about how those fields actually moving the electrons, how they create electricity, and what actually hits the electricity. This is just an analogy of the corpuscles, how we can use it in a religion, in the biology, in our technology, how this idea expresses itself in a many different ways. This is why I'm showing you those pictures. The space field accelerates outward in all directions to the limits of its sphere. This is co-expansion. So the time field decelerates inward to a line, to a point in the limits of its speed, which is closure. So when we talk about expansion and closure, both of them, they must have a limit. And if the space field expands outward, sooner or later, when the strength is diminished, it has to have a point of change. It has to stop and be converted into a time field. So this 0 point of change, it happens in the center, and it happens also in the circumference of the sphere. In the circumference on the sphere, when the space field expanding outward in all direction, when it finish, when the power diminish, here it's converted into a time field, and it starts to travel back toward the center in a straight line, and to go in the center where it's dimensionless point. When it reach the center, does then expand outward. So if we have a strong if you have strong potential point here at the center, it will determine the circumference of the sphere. It will be bigger. Okay, it will be bigger, but they are pulsing, they are breathing inward and outward all the time. It's like expansion and contraction, what is happening. This, for example, can be observed in our planet and the gravitational field, which in a certain point it's not active anymore, and if you go toward the center, you will see that this gravitational field, it's stronger and stronger and stronger, because in the similar way our gravitational field, it's separated through at the center. It's the time field vectors which are traveling toward the centers of the Earth. They are separated from fiery dissociation, and they become space field expanding outward. Okay, and thus then about 30 kilometers of our atmosphere, they begin again to go downward toward the center. And those time field vectors, they are passing, they have very rich harmonic, very high frequency, and they pass through all the materials, and they make closure with this point, with this time field point, and they draw them toward the center. But for this, we're going to talk about different videos when more information is presented. The most important thing for now is to understand that the point of change is happening in two places. Here at the center, the frequency is very low, it's decelerating, it's moving slow, and here on the circumference, it's very fast, it's accelerating, and it's very fast. we talk about this here. It's the space-time antenna you saw on the beginning of the presentation, and you can see this coil that is expanding, and from when it reaches the point of change 0, the biggest part of the circumference, you see that the wire is going and it's connected to the other cone, which is at the center, and it begins to expand from here until it reaches the widest part of the circumference, and again it's connected to the center point of the other coil. So this is an example about what we're talking right now. This is the point of change, it's equal 0. So we have at the center point a coil of copper wire which is expanding every second, every next loop. It's a bigger one. It's expanding. It's bigger, and when it reaches the limit of this kinetic energy, the energy it's making a loop and it's going into the center with a straight line and begin to expand again. This is the main idea of the coils of the space-time antenna, and this is how they interact with this point of change equals 0 here and here of the circumference. I would like to give you more practical, let's say, examples, but this is what I have for now. This is the space field and time field. It's very important to know that they will not fuse but always stand side by side when they are in the same octave. When space and time field, they are in the same resonant frequency and they create octave, they do not fuse. They can divide more and more and more, but they do not blend because they serve as a barrier to each other. Okay, they can stand side by side, but they cannot blend. This is very, very important to know. And here I can give you another example. One moment, I think we skip one slide here. I will go back. No, okay. This is very important to know that attraction and closure describe a principle where repelling does not. This is something that I was reading more than 12 times and recently begin to understand. I will give you an example about this. If you have water with soap, if you put soap inside, you will have foam, and this foam, it will be like increasing the water in volume. You will have bubbles of this soapy foam, let's say, and these bubbles, they will be bonded together. They will be attracted to each other, but they will not repel each other. Okay, each bubble, it will have a certain volume. It will be like a gas filling a balloon, the space field inside expanding, but they will not repel each other. The repelling, what we have in the magnets, it will come in a specific situation when we have a field separation. But again, this is something that we're going to talk later about this. The most important thing is to know that the closure and the attraction is describe a principle in the space-time fields where the repelling does not reply. In other words, if we have space-time field coming towards each other, they will stop and divert each other, but they will not repel each other. Okay, they will not repel each other. This is very, very important. Time field does not push space field, but demands to stand side by side. We already talk about this. A time point or line is always surrounded by swirling space sheet. So this is an example that you can see here. We have a copper wire, and a copper wire, it's a time field predominant substance. It is arranged from a space field subatomic particles in such a way that create time field predominant substance, and which allow the electricity to flow, the electrons to flow, and this is isolating from insulation from rubber or from different materials that are non-conductive, just to illustrate how they can behave. One is defining the other. The space field is defining the time field, because we already said that they are equal in strength and opposite in direction, but they are opposite in direction, but they complement each other. They are not fighting each other. So in this way, we can see the example with the copper wire inside the insulation, that insulation actually is different from the copper wire, but it's serving the purpose to increase the capacity of this copper wire to make it more useful in a sense. This is how a space and time field make each other, define each other, and make use of each other in a more efficient way. So this is a quick recap. And before you ask your questions, just to mention what we learned so far, the universe is made out of harmonic octaves. So when we talk about space fields, we talk about the golden ratio. We're going to talk about fractals. And this is the way how we jump from one octave of resonant frequency to another octave, from something smaller to something bigger, or vice versa. So this is why it's important to know how those fields behave, because we can jump through the octaves through fractals, which are based on self-similarity, and through golden ratio, or through doubling also. The octave is a group of resonant speeds, we already said that, or group of resonant frequency, and a space-time corpuscle has predominance. They are space predominant or time predominant corpuscles. Each space-time corpuscle have time field point and space sphere. This is also what we mentioned, what we share. They are equal in strength, okay, but they're opposite in direction. This is very important to know. Always they stand side by side. We gave the example with the copper wire and with the insulation. For example, when time field is traveling toward the center of the Earth, the gravitational vectors of this force of the gravity is traveling towards the Earth, they decelerate toward the center, but they are insulated from each other with space field spirals that are moving around them, and those spirals, they're accelerating outwards. This is very important to know. So they define each other, they separate each other. The time field is subject to closure. We already said about this. It's contract upon itself until reach dimensionless point. The space field is subject to expansion. It has a spatial mechanical properties and expand like forceful wind, like a gas filling out of balloon. The circumference of the sphere is determined from the potential energy of the time point at the center. So when we talk about the space-time antenna, this Merkaba that you saw, it's designed to create compression. Each of these small fractals that you can see on the antenna of Sierpinski gasket, it creates like intersection of each of these intersection. It creates this time field point of potential. And as you already know, around each time field of potential, you have a spatial sphere, a space sphere, and combining all of them, all these points of potential, they find ground at the center of the construction, and they make the energy decelerating, the time field energy decelerating inward towards the star and increasing the potential point of the structure. And you as already know, when this happens, when you have a strong potential point, thus then the kinetic energy of the structure, it will increase, and the space field, it will expand outward with a much greater velocity. So this is why, this is where the things will start to make sense. But for this, maybe much more things needs to be said, and many more questions need to ask and to be explained. A space field expands equally in all directions, as we already said. Space-time field will stop or divert, but not repel. This is also very important to know. Otherwise, we will not have substances if they repel. They are space-time predominant, and the time field is the bonding force of all substances, but they do not repel the fields. They stand side by side. This is very important to know. I will stop here and I will allow you to ask any questions you like. We said a lot of things, a lot of information. I believe that most of it, maybe it doesn't make sense. It was the same for me. When I read first these articles, I didn't understand nothing. Maybe 5%. I was sleeping 5 minutes after I began reading them. And the reason I read them more than 15 times, it's first because my job now is to do these devices, okay? And I find out that those ideas are making sense, they are valid, they are valuable. And the other reason is that I feel through my intuition that this is information that is worth it to be studied. And the third reason is that also we spoke with Bashar and I represent to him those ideas, and he confirmed that these principles are exactly as I described to him about gravitational field, about electric field. He confirmed that this it's the way I tell him, or most of the idea, 99% of the idea. So now I will allow you to ask any questions you have. I see here on the chat that there